Good afternoon and welcome to our CSG Groundwater webinar. Before we begin, if you experience any technical difficulties, please call 1-800-733-416. And if you have any questions, please type it into the chat box and we will do our best to address all your concerns. For now, I'll pass on to Daniel Phipps, our CSG Project Leader.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Phipps and I'm the Project Leader of the Coal Seam Gas Project here with AgForce Projects. Today's webinar will be discussing coal seam gas and groundwater. This will be a listen-only webinar, and hopefully you can hear the audio across the internet okay. And if you have any technical difficulties, please call the number that Caitlin provided. We'll be going through a number of different issues in the webinar this afternoon, and at any point, if there are any questions that you have or if there are any information that you would like to share with us from your experiences, either as industry, landholder or government, please feel free to do so. Following the webinar this afternoon, this will be recorded and we will make the webinar as well as the recording available on our website as soon as possible, as well as emailing out a link to everybody who has registered for the workshop. So all the information is provided, you're able to share with as many people as you like. And following the webinar, as landholders or otherwise, if you have any questions about your circumstances or would like any more information, you can contact myself at any point, either by email or by calling the AgForce office in Brisbane, and I'm able to provide one-on-one technical support to any information that you require or any questions that you may have, whether it is related to the land access framework, groundwater concerns, or actually negotiating an agreement with resource companies. The Landholder CSG and mining project is a project that's been running for about 4 years now, and we've seen almost 4,000 landholders across the state and Queensland. It's a project that's funded in partnership with the Queensland Government, the Queensland Resources Council, as well as the Australian Petroleum Production and Exploration Association, or APIA, as well as the Gasfields Commission Queensland. We provide a service that allows landholders to attend workshops in the regions throughout Queensland to provide group as well as one-on-one assistance in all stages of the resource process. So whether it's coal seam gas or mining, we're able to go through all aspects of the industry, including the land access framework, compensation, groundwater concerns, as well as complaints and issues that you may like to raise with us as an industry body, and also avenues of support in order to resolve those issues. We also do technical field days, and we've hosted a number of technical field days focusing around biosecurity concerns, looking at the interactions of agriculture and the resource sectors in Queensland, as well as groundwater field days where we talk about the regional hydrogeology of the area, and we bring out very specific regional information. We also can deliver property computer mapping workshops where we train landholders how to use a digital computer map, how to create a property map and a property plan for your operation, and how to use that as a tool in the negotiation process with the resource company. So if anybody would like information on those services that we can provide through the project, they're free to all Queensland landholders. Please feel free to contact AgForce here in Brisbane if you'd like to hold a workshop in your town, or if you've got a group of landholders, neighbours or friends or family, and you're negotiating with the resource company, then we're more than happy to come out and talk to you as a small group to try and develop some conduct provisions and provide some information that's free of any fear-mongering or scaremongering. It's just the true facts of the information as it is. So the webinar today, we will try our best to stick to time, hopefully not long after 3 o'clock, depending on how many questions we get asked. We do have a lot of people on the webinar this afternoon, and we'll do my best to stick to time. The topics that we will cover hydrogeology, as well as predictions of the groundwater impact, delivering some information on the Surat Basin Underground Water Impact Report, which is the regional model about the groundwater predictions for the industry. I'll also be talking about the regulations that are based around the framework for Make Good, for example, as well as groundwater impacts. And I'll also be going through as landholders or those working with landholders, what are the rights under this Make Good framework, and what are some of the aspects to consider during the negotiation of a Make Good agreement, for example, or those that are developing agreements for advanced activities on their property, such as drilling wells. So I'll be sharing the knowledge and experience that I have developed over the last 4 years of the project, and the almost 4,000 people that we've seen through this workshop, through the project, sorry. It's important to note that the session today does provide an overview of information, and at that it is quite a broad overview, given that this is quite a detailed area of the industry, and the specific information around groundwater is a very intricate area. So any landholders that are negotiating agreements for access, for advanced activities, or for developing Make Good agreements need to be aware that this is only part of the information that you require, and it's absolutely critical that before you sign any agreement, you get that appropriate legal and other professional advice. And when we're talking about groundwater, it's important to get that expert groundwater advice in the negotiation process. Because we have, when people registered for the workshop, they have provided a few questions about what they'd like to learn from the workshop. A lot of people indicated that they really need a bit of a base starting point about coal seam gas. So I'll briefly explain the base point around groundwater and some of those concerns. So coal seam gas, or CSG, the industry in Queensland is basically in the Surat Basin and the Bowen Basin, which is in northern and central Queensland, are the main target areas for the industry. And the wells, as you can see on your screen, are drilled into the coal seam, and the coal seams vary in depth across the two basins, but typically 3 to 1,000 or 1,200 metres deep. The gas is actually held in pressure in the seams by the water and the coal and the pressure above it. So in order to get that gas, they need to get the water from the coal seams, and that's via a process which is actually called depressurization, actually depressurizing the coal seam. By reducing that pressure, what it does is it actually allows the gas and the water to flow to the surface. So the water is actually extracted as a byproduct of extracting the gas, and it's unavoidable, which is why we have concerns about the amount of water, but also the impact that will have on other aquifers. Once the water and gas are both brought to the surface via a pump, there's a separator, and the separator separates the water and gas into different pipelines, and the gas and the water going off to their respective treatment facilities. When we talk about the industry, there's a base graph that we can use to demonstrate the relationship between water and gas, and that typically flows that there's a larger amount of water extracted at the start, depending on the pressure at the seam, and a lesser or lower amount of gas is produced. And as you can see in the diagram, over time, that water production begins to decrease as the seam is depressurized or dewatered to a degree, and the gas production starts to increase. So when we look at the time frame impact of the coal seam gas, but also the amount of water that's being extracted, a lot of water is extracted earlier, and then that begins to peter out over time. But the key message to take away is that the industry will continue to extract water by the process of extracting gas, and that this is a long-term management issue that has to be addressed. When we look at the Surat Basin, the main target area for the industry, the main coal seams that they're extracting from is called the Walloon coal measures, and that's made up of a number of different coal seams. In the image you can see, which is supplied by Origin, you can see that the aquifers above and below the coal seams are aquifers that are actually used by landholders and other industries across the Surat Basin. In order to get the gas, like I said earlier, a well is drilled into the coal seam, and that water and gas is extracted from the coal seam and brought to the surface. The relationship that the Walloon coal measures has with the above and underlying aquifers has a degree of interconnectivity, where the process of extracting gas and water actually extracts both pressure and water from the coal seam itself. What that issue relates to is that it relates to above aquifers or aquifers below actually experiencing potentially a decline in pressure or a decline in the quantity of water because of that relationship of water and gas being in the coal seam, and that actually having an aquifer on an impact on the aquifers above. The process of extracting the gas is a relationship between dewatering the coal seam, or a process of reducing the pressure in the coal seam, which is called depressurizing. So in order to get that gas out, a well is drilled into the coal seam and the water and gas are brought to the surface. That water and gas is then separated at the surface infrastructure, and the water and gas are sent to different facilities. The relationship between the water and gas production is that when the well is sunk, initially, depending on the degree of pressure and water at that point, a large amount of water or a considerable amount of water is produced and a lesser amount of gas is produced. And as you can see in the image on your screen, that over time, the water production begins to peter out and the gas production starts to increase. And that's because as the seam is depressurized, the gas can flow more freely without having to extract as much water. But the water production will continue over the lifespan of the industry, and it'll become an issue that requires management over the lifespan of the industry. And we talk about this as we move through. What happens to the water when it's brought up, I'll talk about it in the coming slides. In the Surat Basin, to go back over what I said before, the coal seam that they're targeting is called the Walloon coal measures. The Walloon coal measures are made up of a number of different coal seams, and what that actually sits in is part of the Great Artesian Basin, as the Surat Basin is. The overlaying aquifer, called the Springbok sandstone, and the underlying aquifers are the Hutton and the Precipice sandstones. The process you can see in the diagram is that the Walloon coal measures sits between these two aquifers, which are aquifers or water-bearing strata that are highly utilised by both agriculture and industry across and domestic use across the basin. So by depressurising the Walloon coal measures, in essence what you create is a low pressure area in the Walloons, and you have higher pressure or unequal pressure in the above and below aquifers. And what modelling has started to confirm is that due to the depressurising the coal seam in the Walloon coal measures, that this has and this will have an effect on the above and below aquifers, either by moving pressure or water being drawn into the aquifers. And what that will relate to is landholder bores or domestic bores that are tapping into those aquifers, experiencing a decline in pressure or quantity of water. Now, as I go through the presentation, I'll expand on that some more, but this is basically to point out that the relationship that the coal seam has in relation to the other aquifers above and below. What sit between aquifers is an area which is known as an aquitard, and an aquitard is a layer of impermeable or very low permeability material, and what that does is it actually acts as a seal to those aquifers, and it stops or slows down the movement of pressure or water between those two aquifers. So the reality is that there are areas across the Surat Basin, which I'll explain later on, where the Walloons come in contact or closer contact or connectivity with these other aquifers, and therefore those aquifers are likely to have an impact. It's important to understand the amount of water that's in this Surat Basin. When we talk about water across the GAB, we're talking significant quantities of water. We're talking across the Great Artesian Basin almost 65,000 gigalitres, which is a huge quantity of water. When we talk about the amount of water the industry is expected to extract, it's likely that early estimates are indicating about 90 gigalitres will be the average extraction. And across the Surat Basin, the agricultural industry extracts about 200,000 or above 200,000 megalitres per year. This is to say that the increased activity from CSG is also then likely to start to result in regional pressure declines of some of these aquifers. In the Bowen Basin, which is the northern areas or the central areas of Queensland and north of Roma and Injune is the southern Bowen Basin. the target formation that the industry is accessing is called the Bandana Formation. And the Bandana Formation is an older, deeper, a coal seam as opposed to the Surat Basin, and it also has a lot less water as opposed to the Surat Basin. What we have in the Bowen Basin is the Bandana Formation and the Sealing Aquitard, like I spoke about before, being the Rewan Formation, with the closest GAB aquifer being the Precipice Sandstone. Now, as a result, similar in the Surat Basin of the relationship that the coal seam has with the Precipice Sandstone, there are likely to be some regional and localised impacts as a result of depressurising that seam, which I'll talk about as modelled by the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment. To put in perspective the development of the industry across Queensland at the moment, since I've been running this project in 2011, there was about 2,000 production wells, give or take, at that point, to the point where we're now as of January 2015, looking at approximately 5,500 production wells across Queensland. Now, the industry estimates, as you can see, are anywhere from 18 to 40,000 wells across the lifespan of the industry, so a 30, 40-year period potentially. What this highlights, and as shown on the map on your screen, is that the industry still has a lot of development yet to come. And what we're advising landholders is that it's critical to remain informed of the development of the industry as it continues, but also the development of regulations as they change and government legislation. And the role that AgForce Projects plays is to engage with landholders and industry and government to make sure that these remain informed. The map on your screen shows the three basins across Queensland that the industry is working in. In blue is the Surat Basin, in green is the Bowen Basin, and in red is the Galilee Basin out in Western Queensland. The black dots symbolise individual CSG wells that existed as of 2011, April 2011, and the red dots are wells that have been drilled since April 2011 up until this year. So you can see the development across the span of the Surat and the Bowen Basin, but also exploration occurring out in that Western Galilee Basin region. And as I indicated earlier, this symbolises about 8,000 wells at various stages of exploration, production or appraisal. And when we talk the potential for 18 to 40,000 wells, the development is still yet to really ramp up in terms of drilling wells. An area that we recommend that landholders and community and industry representatives use to find more information is called the Queensland Coal Seam Gas Globe, or the CSG Globe, and it's part of the Queensland Government's Queensland Globe platform. And what it uses is Google Earth as its platform to provide this information. And on your screen, you'll see Western Queensland, Emerald to Roma, Miles, Dalby and Rockhampton. The portal works like a mapping system, being able to turn on and turn off different layers. And the layer that you're seeing now on your screen are the exploration and the production tenures that have been granted to the CSG petroleum industry. So the difference is the brown tenures are the exploration areas where exploration is occurring, looking for gas and proving its commercial productivity. And the green areas are the production tenures, where the significant quantity of gas has been discovered and they'd like to move into production. So as landholders, or those working with landholders, it's strongly recommended that this is a starting point to find out if there is a tenure over your property, which company holds that tenure, and what exactly that gives them the right to do. You can also look at the number of individual CSG wells across Queensland, and as you can see, this shows you the number of petroleum wells. This is CSG and oil wells that have been drilled across the basin, and these are symbolised by the yellow dots. The link is there on the web page, on the webinar now, that you can access the Queensland Globe, the CSG Globe. Alternatively, you can also contact me for assistance in being able to access the Globe, to be able to find your property or to use it as information, as well as being able to produce maps of your property to use as further information. I'm now going to go through the water management component of the webinar, and hopefully this will start to flush out some more questions. So if you have any questions as we continue to go through, please feel free to put them into the chat box. And as landholders, if you've gone through the process of having a company on your property or negotiating a make-good agreement, please feel free to share your experiences. So what we have in Queensland is a management area called the Surat Basin Cumulative Management Area, or the CMA. Now, this was recognised and declared in 2010, where the industry was beginning to ramp up across the region, and it was recognised that due to the overlapping activity as well as the cumulative effect of groundwater and gas extraction, the impacts were not likely to be restricted to just one company's tenure, rather that it would be right across the region. So what has actually happened is that a regional model has been developed, a groundwater model, and what that does is that covers the area shown on your screen, so from Toowoomba to almost Mitchell up to Emerald and down to the New South Wales border. And this captures the main production area of the industry in Queensland in terms of CSG. The boundary of the CMA goes 50 kilometres or up to 50 kilometres outside the nearest coal seam gas tenure. And what that is designed to do is to ensure that landholders that are on tenure and those that are off tenure, so that means a property that does not have a gas tenure or exploration or production permit over your property, is covered by the same framework as those landholders that do have a tenure of your property, and that your rights are the same within that cumulative management area. As I mentioned before, the Coal Seam Gas Globe has all the tenure and well information, but it also has all of the groundwater data, which we'll be discussing in today's webinar. So when you go onto the globe, you can go under the Surat Cumulative Management Area layer, and what it will provide you is with this information. So this image shows you the outline of the cumulative management area. So this is the area that the model covers, as well as going right down to recognising individual registered bores that have been identified as being likely to be impacted. So once the cumulative management area has been declared, which happened in 2010, what this required, and this was a legislative process, is it required what's called a UWIR, or an Underground Water Impact Report, to be developed. And this was a model report that was developed by formerly the Queensland Water Commission. It's now called the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, or OGIA or OGIA. What this model has done is it's taken a whole bunch of different pieces of data from different sources, and it takes data from all of the CSG companies operating in the area, various government departments, as well as information from the Queensland Government groundwater database, which includes a lot of historical and current monitoring bores, as well as bore logs for registered bores that have been logged with the government departments. So what that model does is it takes all that bits of information, all of the future projection plans that the resource companies are likely to develop, water they're likely to extract, and activities they're likely to embark on, and it puts that into a groundwater model. The model then spits out two affected areas. The first is called an immediately affected area, or an IAA area. Now this is an area which bores that have been identified in the model are likely to experience an impact beyond a set trigger threshold within 3 years. So that was 2012 was when the model was released, until 2015 this year. So bores within the immediately affected area have been identified and negotiations have started, which I will address upon. The second component of the model, which is the more important area, is called the long-term affected area. Now, the long-term affected area are bores which are likely to be impacted as a result of CSG activity beyond that same set trigger threshold, but outside that 3-year period. And as the modelling shows, in the next few slides I'll show you, this is an important area. So once the model has been declared and been in place since 2012, what it requires is that the bores which are in the immediately affected area, the responsible CSG company, so the company that holds the tenure over that property are required to negotiate what's called a make-good agreement, and I'll expand upon what make-good means in the coming slides as well. The long-term affected areas, they also require the resource company to negotiate with the landholder to develop a make-good agreement before those impacts occur. Now, it's important to recognise that the UWIR, the Underground Water Impact Report, is reviewed every 3 years, and that means that in 2015, we're due for a new model, and that will make new predictions and updates about likely groundwater impacts. What you're seeing now on your screen is a image taken from the 2012 report, and this is the immediately affected areas. So these are the aquifers, and the black rings are contours of the aquifer which is likely to experience an impact beyond a set trigger threshold within 3 years as a result of CSG. Now, what it does, or what the model has done, is that it has identified that 85 registered bores have been identified in the model to be within the immediately affected area. So these are 85 registered bores that have been identified as experiencing or likely to experience an impact as a result of CSG within that 3-year period. And as the legislation requires under the Water Act, it requires that make-good agreements must be entered into and that bore assessments be completed before these impacts occur or are likely to occur. On the coal seam gas globe, as you can see on your screen, the coal seam gas globe shows these immediately affected areas. So the black ring, the large contour, is the drawdown contour for the balloon coal measures. So the target area for the coal seam gas industry. It's worth pointing out that the balloon coal measures is quite a heavily utilised groundwater source for landholders across the basin. So it's not just a coal seam; it's also an aquifer that landholders use. And you can see that each of the individual they look like small dots, but they're actually circles when you zoom in on the globe. They're individual registered bores that have been identified in the model as likely to experience an impact within 3 years of the industry from 2012 till this year. So these are the bores that are likely to experience an impact. Any landholders that are concerned that you might have an immediately affected bore, or you believe that your bore is being impacted but it has not been modelled, your rights are the same as a landholder whose bore has actually been modelled in the report as being likely to be impacted. And I'll discuss that in the next few slides. When we talk about the long-term affected area, this is where we have significantly more bores that have been identified in that region. So in the immediately affected area, we had 85 registered bores that have been likely to be impacted. When we look at the long-term affected area, we have 528 registered bores that are likely to be impacted as modelled by the report. We can also see that these bores not only tap into the Walloon coal measures, but also into the Springbok sandstone, which sits above the Walloons, and the Hutton sandstones, which sits generally below the Walloon coal measures. So what this is confirming is that there are likely to be, or there's the potential to be, impacts outside of just the target coal seam as predicted during the model. Now, these long-term affected areas, the tenure holder, so the CSG company that has the tenure over your property, are again responsible and are directed by currently the Department of Environment and Heritage Protection, that the regulator of the Water Act, to do what's called a bore assessment and also enter into make-good agreements before these impacts occur. On your screen, you can see the long-term affected area as it's shown on the Queensland Globe, on the CSG Globe. And again, each of the small rings indicate the individual bores that have been predicted to be modelled, and the colour relates to the aquifer which they tap into. So the black rings relate to the Walloon coal measures, the red rings relate to the Springbok sandstone, the blue rings relate to the Hutton sandstone, and the brown rings, larger contour further north relates to the Bandana Formation. and as we can see, there's significantly more bores in this area. This shows you that the region from Roman to Miles, so you can see that the individual bores that have been identified in the model as being in the long-term affected area, and you can see the large quantity of those tap into the balloon coal measures, so still into the target formation. The next image shows you Miles down to Dolby, and again you can see the bores that are likely to be impacted as a result of the gas extraction. What the globe also allows you to do is it allows you to click on each individual bore, and it allows you to show you the information that relates to that bore in the groundwater model. So on your screen, you can see when you click on a bore, it comes up with the registered number, the RN number, the purpose of that bore, so the aquifer in which it taps into, as well as it housing additional information about that bore. One of the questions relates to looking at are there any impacts likely to be down in St George. As you can see on the map on your screen, the image on your screen, you can see in the St George area that there are no bores or the drawdown contour for any of the aquifers, the Walloons or the Springbok or the Hutton, don't go down as far west as St George. So according to the current model, the current data, there are no bores which are likely to be impacted. It's in the St George region. It's important to recognise that the model only predicts and deals with registered bores, so those bores that have been drilled and registered with the government department. It doesn't deal with those bores that are not registered, such as most stock and domestic bores. So bores that have not been registered are not included in the groundwater model simply because the government does not know where they are. As I was saying, sorry to digress, the globe allows you to click on each individual bore and allows you to find out information about the long-term prediction or the short-term prediction for the impact of that bore. So once you click on that link, what it should do is it should bring you across to the Department of Natural Resources Mines or DNRM website, where the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, or OGIA, bore information is contained. And what it will show you is the same information. It will show you the registered bore number, the geological formation that the bore is logged as tapping into, the description about the impact of that bore, as well as the long-term predicted impact in metres and the company that's responsible to make good because they hold the tenure over your property. So for any landholder across the Surat Basin that is concerned about groundwater impacts and has not looked at the coal seam gas globe yet, this is a starting point that I strongly recommend that you start from. To go onto the globe, to have a look at your property, have a look at your region, to look at the drawdown contours for the aquifers in your area, to see if there are any aquifers that are close to where your bore is drilled to, and if they're likely to be impacted within your region, then obviously that's something that you need to be considering as we move forward. There's also a lot of other data contained within the CSG Globe, and that relates to the DNRM groundwater database. And these are monitoring bores that have been installed by the government right across the region. This is also a great starting point for landholders and community groups to look at in order to get some regional groundwater data about aquifer conditions on your area. So what you can do is you can go onto the globe. Again, there's an option there that looks at registered water bores. It shows you current water monitoring bores and water monitoring bores with real-time telemetry, and it allows you to click on that monitoring bore and look at the information that is available, such as the bore log, the water pressure details, and it shows you the historical information about that bore. So the chart you're seeing on your website, on the portal, is a monitoring bore that's been operating since the 1960s, and you can see that it shows the pressure and water level changes and fluctuations over that 50-year period time span. So as landholders, this is a strongly recommended tool to use. There's also a scheme which is being developed by the Coal Seam Gas Compliance Unit, which is called CSG Net. And CSG Net is a landholder groundwater monitoring program where the groundwater experts within the compliance unit come out and talk to landholders about groundwater monitoring processes and techniques and equipment that can be used, and actually giving you the tips and the tools and the information to be able to monitor your own bore and also be able to feed that data back into the groundwater team at the coal seam gas compliance unit, and actually use that as information to fill the gaps in between the regional monitoring networks. So any landholders right across the region who would like to participate in a program that allows you to monitor and act as a servicing schedule almost for your bore, we strongly recommend that you contact the coal seam gas compliance unit and ask about coal seam gas net, and I have the contact details for the compliance unit at the end of the webinar. So what we've done is we've identified the immediately affected areas, the 85 registered bores. We've also identified the long-term affected areas, the 528 registered bores. So what this is now moving into is a process of which is called Make Good. Now, Make Good is an agreement which is separate to a Conduct and Compensation Agreement, or a CCA. So a CCA, or that Conduct Agreement, is an agreement between you and the CSG company about activities on your property. So drilling wells, doing seismic activities, building pipelines, for example. A Make Good agreement is an agreement and a process that is completely separate to that framework. And this only deals with groundwater impacts, I should spell out. So surface water, so concerns about contamination from dust or fracking or other fluids, to dams or creeks or streams, is a process that's dealt separately. So Make Good only refers to groundwater impacts, so the aquifers under the surface. So what Make Good requires is it requires an agreement to be developed between the landholder and the resource company where there is predicted to be an impaired capacity or an impact to that bore as a result of the coal seam gas activities. And as you can see, the examples of what Make Good may include may be a number of different examples, and it's a process that's negotiated between the landholder and the resource company. It's not something that is stipulated as in what must be done in terms of priority. It must be a negotiation between the landholder and the resource company. And examples may be deepening the bore, so where there is an issue with pressure or standing water level and there's more availability in the aquifer, and simply drilling the bore deeper might be sufficient. Or in some circumstances, there may be the requirement to plug and abandon that bore and actually drill a new bore into another aquifer, whether it's shallower or deeper, or in some instances, accepting financial compensation in lieu of that water supply. Now, the Make Good process is quite a stepped and graduated process. So there's a framework that exists, the same as developing a Conduct and Compensation Agreement for the development of wells on your property. There's a land access framework. There's a stepped process that also exists for the Make Good agreement. And basically, it is where the bore is identified as being in the model, or where the bore has been impacted as a result of CSG. A bore assessment is carried out, and a bore assessment is an assessment of the bore or an investigation on that bore, which is designed to confirm or deny either the predictions from the groundwater model, or confirm or deny whether the bore is being impacted as a result of CSG. And as landholders, you need to make sure that you're negotiating with the resource company about when these bore assessments are likely to be carried out, and asking questions about what is actually included in that bore assessment. And if you have any questions about the testing schedule in the bore assessment or the baseline assessment process, you can contact myself, or obviously you'll talk to the resource company first. If you don't get a satisfactory response, or you'd like some more information, you can talk to myself, or it's also, I strongly recommend that you talk to the coal seam gas compliance unit and you utilise the extensive expertise that they have in their groundwater investigation team. Now, after the bore assessment is completed, the step process now moves into the negotiation process. So whether there is likely to be an impact as a result of CSG, so if a bore assessment indicates that the bore actually sits in another aquifer or is deeper than it is predicted, and therefore there is not likely to be an impact as a result of CSG, then a make-good agreement is still required. And that make-good agreement may simply just confirm the outcomes of that bore assessment process. Or it may be a make-good agreement to negotiate and develop ongoing monitoring regime for that bore, so over the next period of years to monitor that bore periodically to identify any changes in pressure or quantity or quality. Or it may be that the resource company is accepting the impacts that they're likely to have or the predictions of the model, and that you're actually negotiating for an offset arrangement, so a new bore or compensation or drilling another bore. Through this negotiation process, all necessary and reasonable costs, legal, accounting or valuation costs that are incurred to negotiate an agreement have to be covered by the resource company. So it's important to understand the terms of necessary and reasonable, and that's a discussion that you need to have with your legal representative as well as with the company representative. If you're moving into a replacement bore, for example, so if you're likely to experience the impact and you're negotiating for a new bore to be drilled or a replacement bore, there's a few questions that you need to ask both the resource company and also make sure you get that appropriate expert advice. One of the key points is to consider about any changing in water characteristics of other aquifers. So if you're moving from the Springbok to the Hutton, or moving from the Walloons to the Hutton or the Precipice, then it's important to understand what are the specific characteristics of that aquifer, and are there any differences or changes which need to be taken into account. And as you can see there, water temperature is a key consideration to look at this process. If you're moving from an area of low temperature or medium temperatures to an area of an aquifer that has a higher water temperature, then that also has particular concerns about the infrastructure that is used to handle that increased water temperature, or changes in pressure, if it's for stock or if it's for irrigation purposes. It's also important to consider the mineral content or the water quality characteristics of the water to make sure that it's not going to have any adverse effects to your soil or to your cattle, or that if it does require any adjustment or cleaning, that's also taken into account in terms of a cost. When you're taking, or if landholders are taking compensation of a replacement supply, so instead of drilling a new bore, they're accepting financial compensation, it's important to understand or to work out how this might affect the future value of the property. So a make-good agreement, the same as with a conduct and compensation agreement, it binds all future owners to the terms of this agreement as you sell it. So if you sell the property, the conditions of the make-good agreement go with the property, not just with the owner. So if you buy a property with a make-good agreement on it, then as a new owner, you're bound by those conditions. And it's important, if you're taking compensation in lieu of a additional water supply, how will this affect the value of the property to a prospective buyer? It's also important, like it says, to consider the value, and this is an issue to work with your expert advice about the value that backup supply may have in terms of drought conditions. So it may not be a bore that you use all the time. You may only use it once or twice every 5 years or 10 years, or probably in the last couple of years quite a bit more frequently than that. But it also provides a valuable asset, or it's a necessary part of your property during those times. So you need to make sure that compensation adequately reflects that. When we move on to the replacement infrastructure, so about a new bore, looking at cooling ponds potentially for those temperature changes, or looking at larger pumps or increased piping, or if it's water temperature, the type of pipes that your pump is actually using, whether it can handle those pressure or whether it can handle that temperature, is also something to take into consideration. It's also critical that what I'm trying to highlight here is that there's a lot of different aspects to consider during the make-good process, and it's not a process of just simply drilling a new bore. There are many different requirements to consider. So also licensing is also a particular consideration to be aware of. you need to be aware that there are different licensing requirements for moving entitlements, or even moving a stock and domestic bore into a regulated aquifer may have different requirements under the water resource plans with DNRM. So it's important that when you're negotiating an agreement, that prior to that process being finalised, that you check with DNRM, you check with your local DNRM office about moving that entitlement or moving that bore into another aquifer, and if there are any licensing or registration requirements that are required through that process. To provide a bit of an update of the Make Good process so far, so as of November last year, since the model has been finalised in 2012, 33 Make Good agreements have been finalised. What also has been apparent is that there's also been a number of different bores that have been removed from the immediately affected area. So following the bore assessment process, or where there are questions, like it says, about a bore, various departments and their companies and the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, who run the model, work together along with the CSG Compliance Unit to work out if the bore is or is not in the immediately affected area, and if it's been correctly or incorrectly modelled. So following a number of different investigations, 25 bores of the original 85 have been determined as not being immediately affected bores. So what that means is that there are actually 25 less bores in the immediately affected area than were predicted, but there are also an additional 9 bores which were not immediately or initially identified as being impacted that have now been determined that are likely to be impacted or will be impacted as a result of CSG. So you can see now that the revised total comes down to 69 registered bores in that immediately affected area. So when a Make Good agreement can be changed, there are only limited circumstances in when the agreement can be changed. And like it shows you, is that it's when there's a material change in circumstances where the Make Good measures are ineffective, so where lowering the pump or just deepening the bore a little bit is actually not being effective and the impacts are greater than what was initially thought or predicted, or where another effective or efficient measure is available. Now, it's important to understand that, like I said earlier, that these Make Good agreements go with the property. So where the impacts from groundwater are likely to be longer term, so you can see the difference from the immediately affected area of 85 bores down to 69, as opposed to 528 bores in the long-term affected area. The largest degree of impact is likely to come from the long-term impact of the industry, and that is because groundwater moves slowly throughout the GAB. It moves at a rate of about 1 to 5 metres horizontally per year, and the recharge also occurs slowly throughout the system. So in some aquifers, the peak recovery in terms of bringing back the water level to pre-industry conditions is not likely to occur for many decades after the industry has actually left. So the long-term impacts are where we really see a lot of issues developing. So for those of you or those landholders that are outside of that cumulative management area, so that area of Toowoomba to Mitchell to Gundawinja to Emerald, the Water Act, so the act that governs the groundwater activities, it still requires tenure holders, so companies that are producing gas, to develop a Make Good agreement and a groundwater model. If either after an investigation by the tenure holder or an investigation by the regulators, so the Department of Environment or the Compliance Unit, and that bore has been identified as having an adverse impact as a result of CSG, then you're still entitled to a Make Good agreement. So it's important to understand that inside or outside of the CMA, on tenure, off tenure, your rights are the same, and that is to have your groundwater rights protected and your entitlements protected. It's important, though, to recognise that a baseline assessment is critical to understand the condition of the bore, but also the functioning or the capacity of that bore and that aquifer prior to any impacts of industry being felt. So a baseline assessment is basically a snapshot or a condition report of the bore before those activities take place. And this is a really important component to have carried out. So in the first option, you can see that landholders that haven't got any CSG activity near your property, so the closest well, maybe 50, 30, 100 k's away, it's about doing a risk assessment process to look at, well, is it worth you spending your money to do a baseline assessment on your own bore, given the likelihood of impact from CSG? But if you look on the CSG Globe and you can see that around your property there's a lot of bores that are either in the immediately affected or the long-term affected area, then there's obviously potentially a stronger indication that you may be impacted, and therefore a baseline assessment is probably a good idea. As part of the exploration phase, or when a company has what's called an authority to prospect, or an ATP, so that's an exploration permit, when the company approaches you as a landholder to carry out any advanced activities on your property, so drilling a well to extract gas to do some testing, or doing any intensive drilling and pumping activities, that we strongly recommend that as part of the negotiation process, so before access to your property is granted, a company must gain your approval and signed conduct and compensation agreement, or take you to land court to get that approval, that we strongly recommend that as part of the negotiation process, to give that access to your property, you consider and strongly consider that a baseline assessment of your bores is carried out by the company or by an agency that you would like the company to pay for to do that testing as part of that process. So at the exploration phase, there's no legal obligation on the company to do that baseline assessment, but we strongly recommend that as part of the negotiation process and as part of your concerns as a landholder, that a baseline assessment be carried out as part of your conduct and compensation agreement. The question, one of the questions is compensation available for baseline assessments before there is any activity? So before the company comes onto your property to do any activities on your property, then there's no obligation for them to do that assessment or to pay for that assessment. So once the company moves into a petroleum lease or a production permit, so when they're moving from exploration into production, the company has an obligation to do a baseline assessment, has a legal obligation to do a baseline assessment of each water bore within that 10-year area. So to answer the question, once the company moves into production, they must do that baseline assessment on your bore, but before that stage, either at exploration or on neighbouring areas, there's no obligation for them to do that baseline assessment unless they're directed by the department. So the key point is that if you're negotiating an agreement for activities on your property, to consider including a baseline assessment of your bore. If there's no activities on your property, the cost will sit with you as a landholder, and you can try and seek compensation if the company would like to then move into advanced activities on your property, but there's nothing that requires them or legislates them to do that, unfortunately. One of the concepts to think about the baseline assessment is that it's an insurance policy. If you don't have any baseline data of your property before there's an impact or before CSG comes on in 5 years or 2 years or 10 years, it may be difficult to determine the impact if there's no precondition or there's no accurate, more importantly, more accurate precondition report of your bore. So the best way to think of it is that it's an insurance policy. If you can show that this is the condition of the bore, this is the capacity, this is the functional use of the bore before CSG came along, in 5 or 10 years' time or 15 or 20 years' time, there's starting to be a decline in pressure or there's starting to be an impact on quality, then there's obviously more of an argument to show what has actually been that outside influence. There's quite a bit of research being done by the Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment, or OGIA, and they're looking at 2 specific areas. They're looking at the relationship between the Walloon coal measures and the Condamine alluvium. So the Condamine alluvium is a high quality, highly permeable alluvial aquifer on the Darling Downs region, and a lot of testing is being is being conducted by Arrow Energy and Oggia and the department into the relationship between extracting gas and pressure from the walloons and what impact that may have on the Condamine alluvium. And as you can see in your picture, the Condamine sits above the walloon coal measures, and the study is designed to understand exactly the relationship between the two and how easily water and pressure may move between the two. And that will greatly increase the accuracy of the model in understanding the thickness and the ability of the walloons and the Condamine to relate and transfer to each other. The other area that's also being looked at is in the southern Bowen Basin, which is north of Roma, looking at an area where the precipice sandstone, which is one of the GAB aquifers, may come into close or direct contact with the bandana formation, which is the coal seam that they're extracting gas from in the region. And again, working to understand exactly what that relationship is and what are likely to be the impacts of extracting water and gas from the bandana on the above aquifers, the precipice, and what that will then, if any, impact it will have on Landholder or other domestic suppliers. So where you believe that your bore is being impacted, if you're concerned about quantity or quality measures of your bore, so whether it's gas increasing or a funny discharge or decline in pressure or quantity, regardless of being in the model or outside of the model, your rights as a landholder are the same. And what we strongly recommend is that you first make the complaint to the resource company, to the CSG company. If there's one that has a tenure over your property or the nearest company that you're concerned about, you make the complaint to them. And if you're not satisfied with the response from the resource company, then obviously what you'll then do is you'll make a complaint or lodge a concern to the coal seam gas compliance unit, and their telephone and email address are lodged there. What they may do, or what the Department of Environment and Heritage Protection may do, is direct a bore investigation. So they may direct the resource company, or they may do the investigation themselves to determine is the impact as a result of CSG or not. And if it is a result of CSG, then they are required to then direct that a make good agreement be negotiated, and that a supply or an offset provision, whether it's compensation or a new bore, be negotiated. So again, the key point is that whether you're in or without the tenure area or the model area, your rights are the same. And it's important that as landholders that we start to look at our own water supplies and monitoring them. And that's why the coal seam gas net, the CSG net, is a very important project that the compliance unit are running. What we've spoken about throughout the webinar is groundwater impacts and looking at the impact that CSG will have on groundwater supplies. When we talk about surface water, it's an area that's addressed differently, and it's also an area that's addressed under different pieces of legislation. So make good under the Water Act only refers to that groundwater supply. And when we talk about negative impacts or adverse impacts to surface water, it's an area that's addressed typically under the Environmental Protection Act or other pieces of environmental legislation. So concerns of spill-off, runoff of materials, or spillage of sludge or dust, or other environmental impacts. This is an area that's addressed under those different acts. But the area to go to raise these complaints initially, again, is the resource company. If you're not satisfied with the response from the resource company, then again you raise these complaints to the coal seam gas compliance unit. What AgForce has developed is a number of different baseline assessment tools and checklists, and also considerations to take into account during this process. These are available on the AgForce Projects website. They're also available at the workshops that I present, and it goes through lots of different areas, and not just groundwater supplies, but also looking at what to consider in baseline assessments of surface water conditions or roads, weed conditions as a particular concern, and other sensitive areas. So many different areas to consider, but there are tools that are available and that are being developed to help you address this process. So as we move forward, it's important that as landholders you continue to remain aware of the changes in legislation that may occur, but also continue to review impacts. So if you start to see that your pressure of your bore is changing, or the quality of your bore is changing, or that there's strange discharges or gassy content coming from your bore, then obviously that's an indicator that there's obviously something going on. It's much better to try and prevent the issue from occurring or address it earlier rather than wait for years for the impact to really mature. With groundwater impacts from CSG, it's more likely that the impacts are likely to be more gradual and that there will be a slow decline or there'll be slow change in indicators of pressure or quantity, for example. So it's unlikely that there'll be water pumping out fine one day, then overnight there'll be no water the next day. But that's why it's important that people continue to monitor their bores progressively. And that if you're negotiating an agreement for that advanced activity, so for those that are having wells in your property that are actively producing gas, obviously there's a higher risk to your bore, that the bore is monitored more regularly. So considering that it's monitored a few times a year, continuously over the project, is a lot more effective than having one baseline assessment that shows the condition of the bore just at that point. But if you can build up a profile, a continuous profile and a comprehensive profile of the condition of the bore, but also the aquifer, that provides a lot more data to be used in any issues down the track. It's important to continue to use that professional advice. So like I said, whether you're negotiating an agreement or whether you're negotiating make-good agreement, there's necessary legal, accounting and valuation advice you're entitled to seek and use, and the company is required to pay for it. But also, it's important to stay informed. So as we continue to run this project, our current funding is until the end of June this year. Hopefully we'll get more funding to continue to provide this information to landholders, but it's important that as community members or as landholders or other people that are working with landholders in the community, that you continue to get as much information as you can. And at any stage of the process, negotiation process, make good, dispute or otherwise, the Coal Seam Gas project here is able to help and provide you with that free independent support. So that brings us to the close of the groundwater webinar this afternoon. If you, like I've shown on the website, if there are any complaints or issues that you have, obviously the first point of call is your company representative. If you don't have any success or you're not satisfied with the outcome, then you contact the compliance unit, and their numbers are there, or you contact the AgForce Projects CSG team. As part of the CSG project, we also do workshops teaching landholders about what to consider in the negotiation process. So we do workshops right across the state to landholders or community members or anyone that would like information about industry broad information, but also specific information about how to negotiate an agreement and what to negotiate in a CCA and what are some of the aspects to be aware of, what are some of the pitfalls, and what are the areas that other landholders have had success in negotiating agreements. And as I said earlier, these workshops are free and available to all landholders across Queensland, and as long as this project is delivered by AgForce, that information will be available. So I strongly encourage, if we're coming to your region, and next week I'll be in Emerald, actually delivering a workshop on coal seam gas and regional planning on Tuesday, and I'll be in Middlemount next week delivering workshops as well. So if you'd like any other information, please feel free to contact me. Following the webinar this afternoon, the transcript, as well as the recording and the slides of the presentation, as well as some key points, will be made available on the AgForce Projects website and will be emailed to everybody who registered. Before we close the webinar this afternoon, are there any other questions or are there any other points that you'd like to add or share before we close the webinar? We've just got a few people typing in some information, so if you're happy to stay on for a few moments, please do. If not, thank you very much for your time, and I do appreciate you listening this afternoon, and I hope this has provided you with some information. While some people are typing questions, I'd really like to stress that this is a very condensed version of the information that's provided in the workshops that we deliver on ground. So the workshops that I deliver on ground run from 9 till 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and go through in a lot more detail. So the information that we go through is a lot more detailed in the workshop. So this is a very light scratching of the surface in terms of groundwater impacts, but also landholder rights. One of the questions that has been asked is about how to get the government to monitor our bores as a baseline assessment. The quickest answer I can provide to that is that the program that's being offered through the CSG Compliance Unit from the Department of Natural Resources and Mines, called CSG Net, is the best place to start for that process. So the CSG Net program will provide you with the tools, the knowledge, and the understanding to equip monitoring data and equipment to your bore and provide that data back to the government. Where there are particular bores that they are most interested in, the Compliance Unit have come out and installed telemetry monitoring data, so remote sensing groundwater monitoring data to those bores. So if you are concerned about groundwater and like baseline assessment data of your bore and are happy to participate in the program, I would strongly recommend that you contact the Compliance Unit and you talk to the groundwater investigation team within the Compliance Unit about the program called CSG Net.
That's fabulous. Thank you, everybody, for your questions, and we apologise again for the technical difficulties we had at the start. Like Daniel said, we'll provide a recording over the next few days for you, but if you do have any other questions in the meantime or you think of anything, please feel free to email that csg@agforceprojects.org.au email address on screen. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and have a good afternoon.